He had learned early in life how easy it was for people to look past him. In school, he was the boy who sat near the back. Not because he liked it there, but because no one else seemed to notice if he did. Teachers remembered the loud students, the funny ones, the troublemakers. He was none of those. He finished his work quietly, kept his head down, and waited for the bell to ring. Growing up, he lived in a small rented house at the edge of town. The paint on the walls was old, the floors creaked when someone walked too fast, and the heater worked only when it wanted to. His parents worked long hours, and money was always tight. There were no fancy vacations, no big birthday parties. Most nights were simple meals, quiet evenings, and early mornings. At school, things were not easier. He wore the same few shirts again and again, carefully washed and ironed by his mother. They never quite fit right. Other kids noticed everything. A small stain, an old pair of shoes, a backpack that had seen better days. The comments were not always loud. Sometimes they were whispers. Sometimes they were laughs that stopped when he turned around. He tried to ignore it. He told himself that school was temporary, that one day it would all be over. But when you are young, time moves slowly. Each day felt long. Each year felt endless. Group projects were the worst. No one wanted him on their team. When teachers assigned groups, he often ended up with whoever else was left. During lunch, he sat alone more often than not, pretending to be busy with a book or his phone, so it wouldn't look like no one wanted to sit with him. There were moments when he wanted to disappear completely. Not in a dramatic way. Just to not be seen, not be judged, not feel like he was always in the way. He learned how to be quiet, how to listen more than he spoke. He learned that silence was safer. What most people didn't know was that when he went home, he became someone else. In his small room, with a desk pushed against the wall and an old laptop that took forever to start, he found a different world. The screen didn't care how he looked. It didn't laugh. It didn't judge. At first, he used the computer to do homework and watch free videos online. Then, one night, he stumbled across a simple tutorial about building a website. The words were confusing at first, but something about it pulled him in. He followed along slowly, copying lines of code, making mistakes, fixing them, and feeling a small sense of pride when something worked. That feeling was new. It was quiet, but it was powerful. It made him feel capable. Night after night, he kept learning. He stayed up late, long after his parents had gone to bed. Sometimes he fell asleep at his desk, his head resting on his arms. Other times, he lost track of time completely, surprised when the sun began to rise. At school, nothing changed. People still ignored him. Some still made jokes, but inside, something had shifted. He had a secret world where he wasn't invisible. By the time graduation came, most of his classmates were excited. They talked about college plans, gap years, and parties. They took photos, signed yearbooks, and promised to stay in touch. He didn't sign many yearbooks. No one asked him to. On the last day, as everyone threw their caps into the air, he stood at the edge of the crowd, clapping quietly. He felt relief more than sadness. This chapter of his life was finally ending. After high school, he didn't follow the path most people expected. College was expensive, and his family couldn't help much. Instead, he took a series of small jobs, warehouse shifts, late-night cleaning, basic office work. None of it was glamorous, but it paid the bills. What people didn't see was what he did after work. He kept learning. He saved every extra dollar to upgrade his laptop. He read free online books. He joined forums where people shared ideas and helped each other solve problems. There were failures. Many of them, projects that went nowhere. Ideas that didn't work. Times when he thought about giving up and choosing an easier life. But each failure taught him something. Slowly, his skills improved. His confidence grew, not outwardly, but deep inside. Years passed. One small project turned into a slightly bigger one, then another. He started doing freelance work for small businesses that needed websites or simple software tools. The pay wasn't great at first, but it was more than he had ever earned before doing something he actually enjoyed. He moved out of his parents' house and into a tiny apartment. It wasn't much, but it was his. The walls were bare, the furniture basic, but the freedom felt huge. As time went on, he took bigger risks. He stopped taking regular jobs and focused fully on building his own product. It was a hard decision. There were months when money was tight again. There were nights when he questioned everything. Still, he kept going. Eventually, something clicked. A company reached out, interested in his work. Then another. Slowly, his idea grew into a real business. He hired a small team. He moved into a better workspace. The long nights began to pay off. Yet even as his life changed, he stayed the same in many ways. He didn't talk about his success. He didn't post flashy updates online. He avoided attention. Most of the people from his past had no idea what he was doing or where he was. 15 years after graduation, an ordinary evening, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email. At first, he almost ignored it. The subject line caught his eye. A class reunion. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Memories came rushing back. The long lunches alone. The whispers. The feeling of being unwanted. Why now? He wondered. He hadn't thought about those people in years. His life was busy, full. He had responsibilities, meetings, goals that had nothing to do with the past. He closed the email without replying, but that night he couldn't sleep. The idea of the reunion kept returning, not because he wanted to see anyone, but because it felt unfinished. Like a door he had never fully closed. The next morning he opened the email again and read it carefully. The message was friendly, warm, almost too warm. It talked about memories, reconnecting, and celebrating how far everyone had come. He felt a strange mix of emotions, curiosity, doubt, a small sense of fear he thought he had left behind. Long ago he imagined walking into that room, being seen again, judged again. He also imagined walking in as the person he had become. After hours of thinking, he finally replied with a short message. He would attend. As soon as he sent it, he felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. He didn't know what to expect. He didn't know how he would be treated. What he didn't know was that not everyone at the reunion was hoping for a warm welcome. Some people remembered him very clearly, and not all of them were coming with good intentions. After replying to the reunion email, he tried to return to his normal routine, but his mind didn't cooperate. Meetings that usually held his full attention now drifted past him. Numbers on screens blurred together. Every so often, a memory from school would surface without warning. He remembered walking through the hallways with his eyes fixed on the floor. He remembered how laughter could suddenly stop when he entered a room. Those moments had lost their sharp edge over the years, but they had never completely disappeared. Now they felt close again, in the days leading up to the reunion. More emails arrived. Friendly reminders. Updates about the venue. A note about a group dinner afterward. Everything sounded welcoming, almost cheerful. Yet something about the tone felt forced, like someone trying too hard to sound kind. He noticed that a few former slot classmates had already joined a group chat linked in one of the messages. Their names appeared on his screen, familiar and distant at the same time. He didn't join the chat. He preferred silence. At work, his assistant asked if he was feeling okay. He nodded and smiled, saying he was just tired. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. The night before the reunion, he stood in front of his closet longer than usual. He didn't own flashy clothes. He never felt the need for them. Most of his wardrobe was simple and comfortable. Clean lines. Neutral colors. He chose an outfit that felt like him. Nothing just neat and calm. As he drove to the venue the next evening, the city lights passed by like distant stars. The place was a popular event hall near the center of town. Large glass doors. Soft lighting. A sign outside welcoming the graduating class. He parked a short distance away and sat in the car for a moment. hands resting on the steering wheel. He took a slow breath. He reminded himself that he wasn't that quiet teenager anymore. He had built a life on his own terms. Still, his chest felt tight as he stepped out. Inside, the hall was already busy. Groups of people stood talking, laughing loudly, hugging as if no time had passed at all. Music played softly in the background. A table near the entrance held name tags, though many people seemed to skip them, confident they would be recognized. He walked in slowly, scanning the room. Some faces he recognized instantly. Others took a moment. A few people glanced his way, their expressions shifting from confusion to recognition. There it is, he thought. That look. A small group nearby whispered to each other. One person laughed, covering their mouth. Another looked him up and down, clearly surprised. No one greeted him right away. He moved toward the refreshments table and poured himself a drink. He focused on the small details. The sound of ice in the glass. The coolness against his fingers. It helped keep him grounded. Across the room, he noticed a cluster of people watching him. They tried to look casual, but their eyes followed his movements. He could feel it the same way he used to feel it in school. After a few minutes, someone approached him with a wide smile. "It's been a long time," the person said. Using his name like they were old friends, he nodded politely. "It has..." They asked the usual questions. Where had he been? What was he doing now? He answered briefly, keeping things vague. He said he worked in tech, that he stayed busy. The smile didn't reach their eyes. "Oh, that's nice," they said, before drifting away. As the evening went on, more people came by. The conversations followed a similar pattern. Friendly on the surface, curious underneath, almost disappointed by his calm answers. Meanwhile, at the other end of the room, a different conversation was taking place. A few former classmates had gathered together, drinks in hand, voices low. They had noticed his arrival immediately. Some of them remembered him clearly, not as a person, but as a role. The quiet one, the easy target. They talked about him the way people talk about a story. "I think they already know. I can't believe he showed up," one of them said. "Probably still the same," another replied. "Some people never change." There was laughter. Not loud enough to draw attention, but enough to share the joke. Someone suggested making the night more interesting. "Let's see what he's really been doing," one voice said. "It'll be fun." Idea spread quickly. It felt harmless to them. A bit of teasing. A little public pressure. Nothing serious. They decided to bring him into the spotlight later, during the informal speeches planned after dinner. Just a few jokes. A few questions. Let everyone see how far he hadn't come. Back near the refreshments table, he sensed a shift in the air. The glances became more frequent. The smiles felt sharper. He told himself not to overthink it. He had survived worse. Dinner was announced, and people moved toward the tables. He found a seat near the edge of the room. The conversations around him were loud and animated. Stories about careers, marriages, and expensive purchases filled the air. He listened quietly, occasionally nodding or smiling when someone addressed him directly. A person across the table leaned toward him. "So, what do you do exactly?" they asked, their tone casual, but their eyes curious. He paused for a moment. "I run a company," he said simply. "Oh." The person raised an eyebrow. "Doing what?" "Software," he replied. "That's vague," someone else said with a laugh. He smiled politely and took a sip of water at the head of the room. The informal host tapped a glass to get everyone's attention. The room slowly quieted. "All right, everyone," the host said cheerfully. "Let's hear a few words from some familiar faces. It's always fun to see where life has taken us." Few people volunteered eagerly, sharing stories that earned applause and laughter. Successes were exaggerated. Struggles were turned into jokes. As he listened, he felt the tension building. He could sense where this was heading. Sure enough, after a few speakers, the host scanned the room and smiled in his direction. "And how about you?" the host said, pointing. "You've been pretty quiet tonight. Why don't you come up and tell us what you've been up to?" The room turned toward him. For a brief moment, He considered declining. He could make an excuse. He could leave early, but something inside him stayed his feet. He stood up slowly. The chair scraped softly against the floor, louder than it should have been. He walked toward the front, feeling every step as he reached the microphone. He noticed a few people exchanging looks, smirks, anticipation. This wasn't a friendly invitation. He took a breath, steadying himself. The room was quiet now, waiting. He looked out at the faces in front of him. Some were curious, some amused, some indifferent. He thought about the long nights, the failures, the years no one here had seen, and he realized something. Important this moment didn't belong to them. It belonged to him. The room felt smaller now that he was standing at the front. The lights seemed brighter, the air heavier. He could hear his own breathing, slow and steady, even though his heart was beating faster than he wanted it to. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched just long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then someone near the front laughed softly, as if encouraging him to hurry up. "Come on," a voice said. "Don't be shy." Few people smiled. Others leaned forward in their chairs, interested. Phones were lifted slightly, not obvious enough to be rude, but not hidden either. He held the microphone loosely, not gripping it too tight. He reminded himself to stay calm. He had faced tougher rooms than this. Board meetings, negotiations, rooms where millions were on the line. This was different, but not bigger. He cleared his throat. "Well," he said, keeping his voice even, "it's been a long road." Someone chuckled. Another person whispered something to the one beside them. He continued anyway. "After school, I worked a lot of different jobs. Tried different things. Learned as I went." The host tilted their head, smiling in a way that felt more like a challenge than encouragement. "That's it?" the host said lightly. "You're keeping us in suspense." There was laughter again. Louder this time. He nodded slowly. "I guess I am." From the back of the room, someone called out, "So what do you do now?" The question sounded innocent, but the tone wasn't. It carried the same edge he remembered from years ago. The kind of question that already assumed the answer. He paused. Just for a second. Then said, "I run a business." The room reacted immediately. A wave of murmurs rolled through the crowd. "Oh, really?" someone said. "What kind?" Another voice followed. "Is it one of those online things?" More laughter. He could feel the trap tightening. They wanted details. They wanted something to pick apart. "It's a software company," he said. "How big?" The host asked quickly, stepping closer, microphone in hand like a spotlight. He shrugged slightly. "Big enough." That answer drew more laughs. "Come on," the host said. "Don't be modest. This is a reunion. We're all friends here, friends." The word hung in the air, heavy with irony. Someone near the front leaned back in their chair. "Let me guess," they said loudly. "A startup that didn't quite make it?" A few people laughed harder this time. One person clapped sarcastically. He felt a familiar sensation rise in his chest. Not anger, not fear. Something older. The memory of standing in a classroom while others decided who he was allowed to be. He looked out at the crowd again. He noticed small details he hadn't seen before. A few uncomfortable faces. Some people avoiding eye contact. Not everyone was enjoying this. That mattered. He lifted the microphone closer. "It did make it," he said calmly. The laughter faded slightly, replaced by curiosity. "Oh." The host raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "It grew," he replied. "Slowly at first, then faster." Someone whispered. "Sure it did." He heard it. He chose not to react. The host smiled again, but this time there was something tight behind it. "And what does this company do?" He explained in simple terms. He talked about solving problems, helping other businesses move things faster and smarter. He avoided jargon. He avoided bragging. As he spoke, the room grew quieter. Not silent, but attentive. Still, the pressure didn't stop. So someone interrupted. "Are we talking about a real company, or more like a side project?" The question landed hard. He took a breath. "It's real." How many employees? Another voice asked. He hesitated. Just long enough for the room to lean in. More than a few, he said. That earned a mix of reactions. Some laughs. Some raised eyebrows. The host laughed openly now. You're being very careful with your answers. Why not just tell us? He met the host's eyes. For the first time, he saw uncertainty there. Because he said, This isn't really about my company, is it? The room went quiet again. People shifted in their seats. A few smiles faded. The host cleared their throat. Of course it is. We're just catching up, he nodded slowly. It doesn't feel that way. A ripple of discomfort passed through the crowd. Someone tried to laugh it off. Don't be so serious. He didn't smile. I'm not being serious. I'm being honest. The host stepped back slightly. All right then, be honest. How successful is it? This was the moment they wanted. The moment where he would either stumble or exaggerate. He looked down at the microphone for a second. Then back up. It does well, he said. Very well. Few people rolled their eyes. Numbers, someone said. Give us numbers. Phones were raised a little higher now. He could feel the weight of the room pressing in. He could also feel something else. A strange calm. He thought about the nights he slept in his car. The deals that almost fell apart. The people who believed in him when no one else did. He straightened his shoulders. Why do you want to know? He asked. The question caught them off guard. The host laughed nervously. Because it's interesting. Is it? He asked gently. Silence. He continued. Or is it because you already decided what my answer should be? No one replied. He wasn't accusing. He wasn't angry. He was simply stating a truth. In the back of the room, someone cleared their throat. Another person looked down at their plate. The host tried to recover. Look, we're all just having fun here. He nodded. Then let's keep it fun. He paused. Then added, I didn't come here to impress anyone. That line landed differently. The laughter didn't return. He continued speaking, choosing his words carefully. He talked about failure, about learning, about building something from nothing. He spoke plainly without drama. As he spoke, the room changed. Not completely, but enough to feel it. The people who had expected a joke were now listening. The people who had planned a moment were now unsure how to handle it. He finished by saying, I'm grateful for where I am. That's all. He lowered the microphone. For a second, no one clapped. Then, somewhere near the middle of the room, a single person started. It was hesitant at first. Then another joined. Then a few more. The applause wasn't loud, but it was real. The host smiled stiffly. Well, they said, thank you for sharing. He handed back the microphone and stepped away from the front. As he walked back toward his seat, he felt eyes on him again. But this time they felt different. Not mocking, not amused, curious, and slightly uneasy, because the trap hadn't worked the way they planned, and everyone in the room could feel that. Something had shifted. He sat back down, but the room did not return to normal. Conversations resumed, yet they felt quieter, careful. People spoke in lower voices now, as if unsure who might be listening. Forks touched plates. Glasses clinked. But the easy laughter from earlier was gone. He could feel it without looking. The shift. The weight had moved. A few people at his table tried to restart small talk, asking safe questions about food, about traffic, about how fast time had passed. He answered politely, but his attention drifted. His hands rested calmly on the table, though inside. His thoughts were moving quickly. Across the room, the host stood with a tight smile, speaking to a small group. Their shoulders were stiff. Every few seconds, one of them glanced in his direction. He took a slow sip of water. Someone beside him leaned closer. That was unexpected, they said quietly. He turned his head slightly. In what way? They hesitated. You didn't sound like someone who was guessing. He offered a small smile. I wasn't. The person nodded slowly, as if something they had believed for years was finally cracking. A few minutes later, another person approached his table. Then another. Each conversation followed a similar path. Polite questions. Careful curiosity. Less humor. More listening. What kind of software did you say it was? Someone asked. He explained again, still simply, still without details that sounded impressive. He talked about solving boring problems that most people never thought about, moving things from one place to another, tracking, timing, efficiency. The more he spoke, the more he noticed reactions changing. Heads nodding, brows furrowing. People doing quiet math in their minds. That sounds big, someone finally said. It grew, he replied, not far away. The group that had planned the moment watched closely. They had expected him to stumble, to give short answers, to retreat. Instead, he had stayed steady. One of them leaned in and whispered something sharp. Another shook their head, annoyed. They couldn't decide if he was bluffing or hiding something real. Eventually, one of them stood up and walked over. They stopped beside his table, forcing a smile that didn't quite work. You really surprised people tonight, they said. He looked up. That wasn't my goal. Still, the person said, pulling out a chair without asking and sitting down. If you're doing that well, you must have proof. These days, everyone claims success. The words were light, but the meaning underneath was not. The table went quiet. He met their eyes. You're right, he said calmly. A lot of people do. So, the person pressed. He paused. Not because he was nervous, because he wanted to be sure. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The movement alone drew attention. Nearby conversations slowed. A few heads turned. He unlocked the screen and opened an article he had saved months ago and forgotten about. It had been written after a funding round closed. He hadn't shared it with anyone from his past. He had barely shared it with anyone at all. He turned the phone so the person beside him could see. They leaned in, squinting at first. Then their eyes widened. They read the headline twice. Their mouth opened slightly, then closed. What is it? Someone else asked. The person didn't answer right away. They passed the phone to the next person. The phone moved from hand to hand. Each reaction followed the same pattern. Curiosity, confusion, then something close to disbelief. A low murmur spread through the table. Someone whispered, "That number can't be right." Another said, "Is this actually his company?" He finally spoke. "It is." The room seemed to hold its breath. The host noticed the change. They stepped closer, trying to see what everyone was looking at. "What's going on?" they asked, forcing a laugh. The phone reached them last. They read silently. The smile slipped from their face. For a moment, they looked genuinely lost, like someone who had prepared a speech for the wrong audience. "That valuation," they said slowly. "This can't be." He didn't interrupt. "It's accurate," he said after a beat. A few people laughed softly, not out of humor, but disbelief. Someone spoke up from another table. "What are you all looking at?" Before anyone could stop them, the host raised their voice. "It's an article," they said. "About his company?" Now the attention was complete. Chairs shifted. People leaned forward. Conversations stopped. Someone asked, "What does it say?" The host hesitated, then said it. The number, the reaction was immediate. Shock didn't come loudly. It came in silence. In stillness, in people staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. A few people laughed again. This time nervously. "That's not possible," someone said. He shrugged lightly. "I didn't think it was either at first." Questions came quickly now. "When did this happen? How long has it been running? Why didn't you say anything?" He answered them slowly, choosing honesty over drama. "I didn't see a reason to," he said. "It wasn't part of who I was here." Someone near the back spoke quietly, but the room was silent enough to hear it. "We were wrong about you." He looked toward the voice. The person didn't meet his eyes. He didn't feel victory. He didn't feel pride. He felt something calmer. Relief. The group that had planned the moment now looked uncomfortable. One of them avoided his gaze entirely. Another stared at their phone, pretending to be busy. The host cleared their throat. "Well," they said, "that's impressive." He nodded. "Thank you." The word hung between them, heavier than expected. Applause started again, this time louder. It rolled through the room unevenly, like a wave learning its shape. He didn't stand. He didn't bow. He simply sat there, letting it pass. When the noise faded, people approached him openly now. Not cautiously. Not mockingly. They asked real questions. About business. About challenges. About how he kept going, he answered honestly, but briefly. He didn't enjoy the sudden attention. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable. One person said, "I wish I had taken you more seriously back then." He nodded. "I wish I had taken myself more seriously sooner." That answer stayed with them. As the evening wore on, the mood shifted completely. The trap was no longer hidden. Everyone knew it had failed. Some tried to pretend it had never existed. Others looked ashamed. Few tried to attach themselves to his success, asking for meetings, advice, opportunities. He listened politely. He didn't promise anything. Near the end of the night, he stepped outside for fresh air. The noise from inside faded behind the closed doors. He stood under the lights, feeling the cool air on his face. For the first time since he arrived, he felt light. He thought about the quiet kid he used to be, the one who sat alone, the one who was never asked to speak. He wished he could tell him one thing, not that it would all be okay, but that one day, his silence would become strength behind him. The doors opened. Someone called his name. He turned. The night wasn't over yet. He stayed outside for a while, longer than he expected. The cool air helped clear his head. Inside, voices and laughter drifted through the glass doors. But they felt distant now, like noise from another life. He leaned against the railing and looked up at the dark sky. The city lights reflected softly in the clouds. For years, he had imagined moments like this reunion. Not this exact scene, but the idea of facing the past. In his imagination, it was always louder, harsher. This felt quieter, real. Footsteps approached behind him. "I thought I might find you here," someone said. He turned slightly. It was one of his old classmates, someone who had never been cruel, but had never been kind either. Just present, neutral. "Mind if I stand here?" The person asked. "Go ahead," he replied. They stood in silence for a moment. "I owe you an apology," the person finally said. "Not for anything specific, just for not saying anything back then." He considered the words carefully. "You don't owe me anything," he said. The person nodded, though it was clear they wished things had been different. After a while, the door opened again. Then again, a few people stepped outside in small groups, talking quietly. Some glanced his way. Some didn't. One person approached him directly. "I just wanted to say," they began, "you handled yourself really well in there." "Thank you," he said. Another asked, "Do you ever come back to town?" "Not often," he replied. There was an awkward pause. Then the person smiled politely and went back inside. He realized something then. The power he felt wasn't coming from their respect or surprise. It came from the fact that he didn't need any of it. When he finally went back inside, the night was winding down. People were gathering their coats. Hugs were exchanged. Promises to meet again were made, though he knew most would fade by morning. The host approached him one last time. "I'm glad you came," they said, sounding sincere now. He nodded. "So am I." That was true. Not because of what he had revealed, but because the weight he had carried for years was gone. As he walked toward the exit, a few people called his name, asking for his number, his card, a meeting sometime. He responded kindly, but didn't commit to anything. Outside, got into his car, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. His phone buzzed almost immediately. Messages, some were from classmates who hadn't spoken to him all night. Others were from people who had already found his company online. "Congratulations. Sorry. Proud of you." He scrolled through them without much emotion. He didn't reply right away. As he drove home, the streets were quiet. The reunion hall disappeared in his rearview mirror. At a red light, he thought about his younger self again. The boy who believed silence was safety. The one who thought being unseen was the only option. He wished he could sit beside him and say this: "You don't have to prove anything to people who never tried to know you." The next morning, He woke up early, as he always did. The reunion already felt far away. He made coffee, checked his calendar, prepared for a full day of work. In a meeting later that day, no one mentioned the reunion. No one cared where he had been the night before. They cared about plans, problems, and progress. That was the life he had built, quietly, carefully. During a short break, he checked his phone again. The class group chat was busy now. Messages flew back and forth. Some people joked, some shared photos. Some argued about who remembered what correctly. He left the chat without saying anything. In the days that followed, few former classmates reached out privately. Some wanted advice. Some wanted opportunities. A few simply wanted to talk. He responded when it felt genuine. He ignored the rest. He didn't feel bitterness. He didn't feel satisfaction either. He felt finished. Weeks later, he drove past the old school building by chance. The parking lot was empty. The windows reflected the afternoon sun. He parked for a moment and sat there, remembering the loneliness, the quiet, the long days that felt endless. Then he smiled softly, started the car, and drove away. He had built a life where the past no longer controlled him, and that was worth more than any number anyone could say out loud. Life did not change. Suddenly after the reunion, there was no dramatic turn the next morning, no big announcement, no moment where everything felt different at once. Instead, the change came quietly, in small and steady ways. Like light entering a room through a window that had been closed for years, he returned to his routine. Early mornings, long meetings, careful decisions. The work he did still demanded focus and patience. Success had never meant rest. If anything, it brought more responsibility. Yet something inside him had shifted. Before the reunion, a small part of his energy had always been tied to the past. Not in an obvious way. He didn't think about school every day. He didn't replay old scenes in his mind on purpose. But the weight had been there, like background noise he had grown used to. Now that noise was gone, he noticed it during simple moments. Standing in line for coffee, sitting alone in his car at a stoplight, walking through an airport terminal, there was more space in his thoughts, more calm. A few weeks after the reunion, he received an email from someone he barely remembered. The message was long. It talked about regret. About how people sometimes follow the crowd because it feels safer than standing alone. The message ended with a simple sentence, "I hope you're doing well." Oh. He read it twice. Then he replied with a short note wishing them the same. He didn't feel the need to explain his life. He didn't feel the need to forgive or accuse. The exchange felt complete, as it was. Around the same time, he noticed changes within himself at work. In meetings, he spoke more openly. Not louder, not more often, but more directly. When he disagreed, he said so without apology. When he believed in an idea, he defended it calmly. People noticed. One colleague mentioned it casually one day. "You seem lighter," they said. "More present." He smiled. "Maybe I am." As the months passed, his company continued to grow. New clients came on board. Old systems were improved. Problems appeared, as they always did, but they felt manageable. Late one evening, after most of the office had emptied, he stayed behind to review a proposal. The building was quiet. City lights glowed outside the windows. He paused and looked around. For a moment, he remembered the old laptop in his childhood room. The slow screen, the late nights, the feeling of being alone but determined. He realized something then. He had spent years proving its value without ever feeling allowed to claim it now. He no longer needed permission. One weekend, he decided to visit his parents. The house looked smaller than he remembered, but warmer, familiar. His mother prepared food while his father asked about work, listening more than speaking. At one point, his mother said, "You seem at peace." He nodded. "I think I finally am." She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. Later that night, he lay awake in his old room, staring at the ceiling. He thought about how much time he had spent trying to escape. Who he used to be. He understood now that he didn't need to escape him. That boy had survived. He had learned. He had built everything that came after. A few months later, he was invited to speak at a small event. Not a large stage, just a room of people starting their own journeys. Founders, builders, quiet thinkers. He almost declined. Then he remembered what it felt like to sit alone. Searching for proof that someone like him could succeed, he accepted. When he stood in front of that room, he didn't talk about money. He didn't talk about numbers or headlines. He talked about patience, about being underestimated, about continuing even when no one is watching. The room was silent as he spoke. Afterward, a young person approached him, nervous, hesitant. "Thank you," they said. "I needed to hear that." He nodded, understanding more than words could say. Driving home that evening, he realized the reunion had given him something unexpected. Not closure alone, but direction. A sense that his story could now move outward, not just forward. Time passed. The class reunion faded into memory for everyone else. New events replaced it. New distractions took its place. For him, it remained important. But not because of what others had learned, because of what he had released. One afternoon, while sorting through old files, he found a photo from school. A group shot, faces frozen in time. He stood near the edge, half hidden. He studied the image carefully. Then he deleted it. Not out of anger, out of gratitude. That version of him had served its purpose. As the years continued, he stayed true to the life he had built. Quiet, intentional, grounded. He didn't chase recognition. He didn't return to prove anything. He moved forward, and in doing so, he finally became free, not because others saw his worth, but because he never needed them to again. Some stories end when the lights turn off and the room empties. This one did not. It kept moving quietly through days that looked ordinary from the outside, but felt different on the inside. He did not think about the reunion every day anymore. In fact, weeks sometimes passed without it crossing his mind. But when it did return, it no longer came with tension or pain. It came like a reminder of distance traveled. He noticed the change most when challenges appeared, when a deal fell apart unexpectedly. He did not question his worth. He focused on the problem. When someone doubted an idea he believed in, he did not shrink. He explained. If they still disagreed, he let it go. The need to be accepted had loosened its grip. One afternoon, while walking through a crowded street, he saw a group of teenagers laughing loudly, backpacks slung over their shoulders. One of them walked a little behind the rest, quiet eyes lowered. The sight slowed his steps. He did not know that person. He never would. Still, he felt a pull in his chest. Not sadness. Recognition. He wondered how many people carried that quiet weight without knowing it could lift. That thought stayed with him. A few months later, he started something small. Nothing public. Nothing that needed attention. He partnered with a local program that helped young people learn practical skills after school. Coding, design, problem solving. He didn't put his name on it. He visited occasionally, sitting at the back of the room, listening more than speaking. When someone asked a question, he answered simply. When someone struggled, he stayed patient. One evening, a student stayed behind after everyone else left. "I'm not very good at this," the student said quietly. He smiled gently. "Neither was I at first. That was all it took." He realized then that the story he once needed to survive could now help someone else continue at work. His team noticed a shift in priorities. He encouraged breaks. He asked how people were doing, not just what they were doing. He listened. Productivity didn't drop. It improved because people felt seen late one night. Alone in his office, he opened an old notebook he had kept years ago. Inside were rough ideas, half-finished plans. In short lines written during moments of doubt, one line stood out. "I just want to build something that lasts." He smiled. He had. Not just a company, a life, occasionally. Messages from the past still arrived. invitations, updates, attempts to reconnect. He responded when it felt honest. He stayed silent when it didn't. There was no anger in that. Choice, only clarity. 1 year after the reunion, he received a message asking if he would attend another gathering. Smaller, more casual. He read it once, then he deleted it. Not because he was afraid, because he was done measuring himself against rooms that no longer mattered. Instead, he spent that evening walking through his neighborhood, watching lights turn on in windows. Listening to distant sounds of everyday life, he felt grounded, complete. The quiet boy from the back of the classroom had not disappeared. He had grown roots, and those roots held. Strong, that was the real success. Not the numbers, not the headlines, but the freedom to live without looking back. Accept with understanding, and as he continued forward, one steady step at a time. His story no longer needed an ending. It had become something better, a beginning.